Now I demonstrate how to do a two-pivot movement. From your fighting stance, you first execute the pivot we just covered. After the first pivot, your opponent continues to attack, and you execute a second pivot to again evade his strike. This second pivot is a little more complicated. It demands a little technique. But if you dedicate time to practicing it, you'll begin to use it with ease. One pivot, now the second pivot. The counterattack is optional. You can escape and then attack with a punch or kick, but the most important part is to execute both pivots and evade your opponent's relentless attack. Just as with the previous technique, you're going to end up with your opposite leg forward. I started with my left foot forward, and I ended after both pivots with my right leg forward. Although this might be a little hard to manage when first starting out, utilizing movements such as these will confuse your opponent. No matter how hard he attacks, he won't be able to find you because you're always one step ahead, always cutting angles. Two pivots in the counterattack. One more time. A little more loose now, a little quicker. Now I demonstrate how to take two backward steps and then execute a pivot, a combination of movements that comes in handy against an advancing opponent. As always, you want to have correct posture and a strong base. You want your guard to be up for protection. Now when you take each step backward, you want to combine it with a strike to prevent your opponent from overrunning you. That strike will help you maintain distance and slow your opponent's advance. So you take one step, another step, and then pivot. One more time. 1, 2, pivot. You never want to take more than 2 steps backward. 2 steps is your limit. Always one step, your second step, pivot. This is to maintain distance and prevent my opponent from rushing forward. It's meant to slow his attack. After executing the pivot, you can counter with a punch or kick. Simple movements. Notice how as I step back, I strike with my lead arm. Now we'll do it a little quicker, as if I were fighting. This technique is very similar to the previous one in that you take 2 steps backward and then pivot. However, with this technique, you pivot on your rear leg, which takes you in the opposite direction and reverses your stance. 2 steps back and then pivot in the opposite direction. So, 1, 2, pivot.
Dois steps, saindo.
So you take 2 steps and then you exit to the opposite side. Now I will show you a little faster. Now I'll show you a simple movement that you can use to close the distance between you and your opponent. Normally when you move, you step the foot that is closest to the direction that you want to head. For example, if you want to go forward, you step first with your lead foot. If you want to move back, you step first with your back foot. If you want to move to the right, you step your right foot first, and if you want to move to the left, you step your left foot first. However, with this technique you break that rule, but you do so with a specific goal in mind, which is to close the distance without telegraphing your movement. You are conscious of your actions. So I step my rear foot up to my lead foot, and then I push off my rear foot to shoot my lead foot forward. As always, I slide my rear foot along to maintain my fighting stance. Once I land my first strike, I will follow up with the combination. What is important here is how I close the distance using footwork. If I'm farther away, then I can push off harder and cover more distance. But because I step with my back leg first, I do not telegraph my movement. My rear leg is hidden and I do not bounce my head. He cannot see me coming. I will demonstrate one more time. With this technique, you can cover a little distance or you can cover a lot of distance. This is another way to cover distance, but instead of stepping, I simply push off my rear foot and shoot my lead foot forward. As always, I slide my rear foot along to maintain my stance. This footwork allows you to make a very quick attack. Now I'll demonstrate how to put all the footwork techniques I've shown together into fluid movement. Leg movement, attacks, pivots, now I do all the free movement with an opponent.
Você vai mostrando. Movimentação. Movimentação. Um pivô. Um pivô. Segundo pivô. E eu ataco. Sai pra trás e volta aí.